What's up YouTube, and welcome to the Anabolic Outpost. In this edition, I will be teaching you how to make my Anabolic Apple Pie French Toast Bake. Now this is a great spin-off of the traditional Anabolic French Toast that we all know and love, but this time it is baked in an oven and is baked more of like a pie form and one consistent pie than it is just slices of French toast. Not only is this a great alternative to regular anabolic French toast, but this is also a great meal prep recipe that will save you a lot of time throughout the week and give you breakfast for at least a few days. What you will need for this recipe is a whole loaf of bread. I use whole wheat. Personally, you could use white, but I actually like the flavor of whole wheat better. It doesn't really matter between white or whole wheat. Egg whites, apples. I like the Granny Smith apples the best, but you could use whatever apple you like. It really is all personal preference. Cinnamon, vanilla extract, whole eggs. This is really an optional step. If you want to use all egg whites, you can, but I personally like a little bit of some healthy fats in there. But if you're on a cut, trying to cut calories, you could just use all egg whites. Cooking spray. And finally, some sort of artificial sweetener. I like sucralose personally, but it all depends on what sweetener you like and what you want to add. Before we start, you're going to want to make sure that your oven is preheated to 400 degrees. The first step and the most tedious step is slicing the apples. You're going to need 1,500 grams of apples, so it's going to take a lot of slicing. You're going to want to slice it into the tiniest pieces you can. I'm going to run a time lapse here pretty shortly, but if you're wondering how I slice my apples, this is just how I go about it. I just slice them in a grid pattern. This is the consistency right here in the small pieces that you are looking for throughout your bake. Alright, now after about 30 minutes and one sliced finger later, you should have your 1,500 grams of apples cut up. Now you're going to incorporate the bread. In order to do this, you're just going to split it into nice small pieces. I like to just grab 3 or 4 slices at a time and just split it into the smallest pieces possible. Don't worry if they're super small, it's all going to get mixed together and you really won't notice how big the bread is. If you are also unsure about how big your loaf is, it'll come out to 570 grams worth of bread. Alright, now that the bread is all split up, you should have a pretty decent layer at the top. And now you're going to start to sprinkle the cinnamon in. You're going to need 21 grams of cinnamon or 3 tablespoons. Alright, the vanilla is starting to go in next. You're going to need 15 grams of vanilla or 1 tablespoon. Now I'm going to put in the sweetener. I can't give you an exact weight amount because it really varies sweetener to sweetener, but if you're using a 1-to-1 substitute, you're going to be looking at about 5/8 cup, and it all depends on how sweet you like. I found 5/8 to really be the best, but once you make the recipe over and over again, you can play with the amount of sweetener, and if you don't have a 1-to-1 substitute, you're just going to have to kind of play around and look up what the ratio is and how much you're going to have to add. Alright, I'm cracking in my 4 large eggs right now. Like I said, it's an optional step. If you want to use full egg whites, you can. It's going to depend how much egg whites you're going to put in though. If you're using the eggs, you're going to want to put in 1,700 grams of egg whites. But if you're not using the eggs, you're going to want 1,900 grams of egg whites. Alright, I got the egg whites going in now. Like I said, I'm putting 1,700 grams in. But if you didn't add the 4 whole eggs, you're going to want 1,900 grams. Now, I learned a very valuable lesson today that my scale only goes up to 3,000 grams, so don't pay attention to how many grams it's saying right now. I actually had to dump a few egg whites out and remeasure. I know, precious protein down the drain. It was very sad to do, but I had to do it for this purpose of this video. The good part about pouring whites in last over the bread is it starts to dissolve all the powders that you put in, and it starts to compress the bread a little bit down as well. I have a huge mixing bowl. Hopefully you have a mixing bowl as big as mine, otherwise you might run into some problems and might have to get creative with how you do it. But at least pouring the egg whites in last will compress the bread down and give you some more room to mix. Alright, now for the fun part. I'm sure you've been wondering how this is going to mix all together, and the best way to do this is with your hands. I've tried to stir it before, but it doesn't really get mixed like you really want to, and using your hands is the best way to do it. A pro tip right here is to make sure that you break up the yolks first. You're not going to want a whole yolk inside of your bake. It's not going to be very tasty, and it's probably going to be unpleasant if you run into that while eating. But you're going to want to work at this for about 2 minutes or so to make sure that everything is incorporated and mixed in, and all the cinnamon and sweetener starts to dissolve in the egg whites. Alright, you're going to want to break out your Thanksgiving casserole dish to bake this in. Luckily I got this big old casserole dish that fits it perfectly fine, but it's something that is a little smaller than this will probably work very well. You're going to want to take your spray and spray the inside of that to make sure it's all oiled up, and it's not going to stick during the baking process and be a pain in the ass to clean. You're going to take your bowl and you're going to dump it in there, and I already got my rubber spatula ready to go to get all the extra egg whites and excess bread and apples into the dish. Can't have any extra protein left behind. And did you think you're done getting in there with your hands? Because you're definitely not. You're going to want to press it down. Make sure everything's evenly distributed so it cooks good in the process. And the last thing you want to do is commit a sin in the anabolic kitchen, and that is washing precious protein down the drain. Be sure to lick your hands after this, and don't have any protein go down the drain because that is a sin. Alright, you're done with the preparation process. You're just going to go ahead and throw it in the oven, and you're going to bake at 400 degrees, which you should have already preheated earlier, and you're going to throw it in for 60 minutes. Oftentimes you're going to need 70 or even 75 minutes. I usually just start out with 60 and then go from there. It's all going to depend on your oven and how long your oven takes to cook, but mine ends up being in there for a total of 70 minutes. If you're unsure of when to pull it, you're going to want this golden crispiness at the top of the bake, and you're also not going to want any egg whites to appear liquidy. You're going to want them to firm up at the top. Keep in mind too that it's super hot in there and it's going to continue to cook, so it doesn't have to look perfect. The egg whites are going to settle down and it's not going to be as liquidy as it looks, but you don't want any liquid to be visible at the top, and you want a little bit of golden brown crispiness to start to appear, but not too much because then it's going to bake into the sides and be a mess to clean up even with the cooking spray. You could go and portion it to your desired amount. This usually lasts me 4 to 5 days depending on how hungry I am. I just slice it in the morning, and then just depending on how much I want, I could just put however much I want. And just like normal French toast, you're just going to want to cover it in some sugar-free syrup. And as a wise man once said, if she's not dripping, then I'm drowning. And that is another successful day at the Anabolic Outpost. If you had any questions regarding this recipe, I would be happy to answer them in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed this recipe, be sure to like and subscribe for more recipes like this one. I will be churning out videos on the weekly.